we can go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today and investing an hour of your time into getting curious about what is causing your stress and how to better prevent it, and just really how to take care of yourself so you aren't getting stuck in that loop of chronic stress like so many of us are, myself included, for I feel like the majority of my life. And thank you so much for including Impactury on your journey towards living a life with more purpose and ease. So before we actually jump into the event, so like always, I just want to take a minute to get present. So if you want to close your eyes for this, that's okay. Just taking a deep breath and letting go of whatever happened before this session, whatever you have going on after, just being here in this moment. Okay. All right, so welcome everyone to Impactury's event on burnout recovery and stress relief with Tanya. So I'm going to share a bit about my own story around burnout and stress. Then I'll introduce Tanya. I'm going to hand it off to her. And at the very end, we'll share a few opportunities with you where you can explore these topics a bit further if you are feeling interested in that. So to start, so I'm Sarah Powell. I am the founder of Impactury. And on the topic of burnout, I was living most of my life as a goal achieving machine, like at all costs. So before Impactury, I was a consultant for Accenture. Then after I moved to Madrid to do my MBA, I was the chief operating officer for a digital consultancy. I also co-founded a clean water social enterprise in Ethiopia. So I was getting things done, like check, 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 achieving all of my goals and feeling really good about all of these accomplishments. And then personally, I really took pride in kind of being the go-to person that my friends and family could rely on. I always kind of like had it together, but like on the outside. And for me, I really didn't have any limits when it came to supporting my friends, family, colleagues. I was definitely kind of the strong one in the group. But at the same time, like continuing with this pattern was completely exhausting. Like I used to joke that I had been tired for like a year. And also when I would go to sleep, I would just feel like a tightness in my chest that was terrifying. I'm like, is this what a heart attack feels like? Like I would have this every night for so long. But I just continued to push on. And then finally, after years and years of ignoring the signs of stress that my body had just been screaming at me to notice, it finally forced me to stop. And then my body was losing weight uncontrollably. I was chronically fatigued, like beyond just, oh, I'm tired. I come to find out my thyroid was all out of balance. I had really horrible, debilitating anxiety, depression. It really got to the point where I was unable to work, which again was another blow to my ego. And this was a very the most vulnerable position that I had ever been in. I was actually unable to really care for myself. And so at this point, I had to just swallow my pride and ask for help, which again was super uncomfortable for me. But I am so glad that I did, even though this was a horrible situation to be in, it was actually such a gift because through the support of doctors and just so much love and support and also years of dedication, I was able to get my physical health back on track. But for me, the real win was actually getting control of my mind. So through meditation, which I cannot recommend this enough. I know I say this in every event. Meditation is a total game changer. But through meditation, journaling, therapy, I really started to understand myself more. And I stopped resisting whatever was coming up for me in those moments of stress. So I was able to ask myself, what is triggering me? Why? what did I need in those moments? And also the importance of completing the stress cycle. Oh my goodness, this is like another game changer for me, but I'm going to let Tanya explain more about that. But anyway, I know that for us high achievers, being like on all the time can be our normal. But I promise you, you can still achieve your ambitious goals without being completely consumed by stress and anxiety. And I know this because I've experienced both the good and the bad. And that's actually what inspired me to create Impactury. So I hope that today's event with Tanya will give you a little bit more awareness and tools to help you live a joyful life with more ease. This is something that Tanya specializes in, helping leaders do exactly that. And before becoming a coach, she actually worked in corporate at a few different consulting firms. So she understands that grind and the stressors that really come with a high pressure job. So hope you grab a notebook and pen. This is going to be full of lots of insights for you. And now I'm going to hand it off to Tanya so you can work your magic.
Thanks, Sarah. And hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today. I'm first off just thrilled to be here. And as Sarah mentioned, I'm Tanya Jaklis. I'm a life and leadership coach, and I've been passionately supporting both leaders as well as organizations in creating places and spaces where everyone thrives, right? So I love to say more joy, less stress. So we're not going to get rid of stress, and we'll talk about that today, but maybe we can lessen it a little bit so that we can really enjoy those joyful moments in our lives, because it is possible. And just a little background about me, just a little bit about me. Earlier in my career, I was an economist, and as well as a management consultant. As Sarah mentioned, I worked about 17 years in consulting, and supporting clients with some of their toughest challenges. And I loved my roles. I loved them until I didn't. And really in all of my roles, including the one that I have now as a coach, what I've always loved is connecting with people and supporting them with living a life that really not only brings them joy, but energizes them and inspires them. And it's going to be different for all of us, right? All of us are energized in different ways. So, and the key, right, is to figure out what that is, what energizes us, what inspires us, and to do that as often as possible. So I'm excited to dive into our conversation today. Our agenda for today, just the key things that you're going to learn. We've got them up here on this next slide. So we're hoping that you'll walk away with a curiosity, that you'll learn to get curious about your stress. As I mentioned, and you'll hear me probably say quite a bit throughout this conversation, we can't completely get rid of stress. It's a normal part of being human. But we can definitely lessen it and learn how to respond to it in effective ways, in healthy ways, in ways that don't lead to burnout. So that's the other thing that we'll talk about today. Is we'll talk about some strategies for what it looks like to complete the stress response cycle. What does it look like to acknowledge our stress, acknowledge where it's coming from, and help ourselves to respond to it consciously versus just simply reacting how we've maybe always reacted in the past. And then the final thing is to take intentional action to really make a change. So I'd love folks to just put in the chat, how ready are you to make small changes in your life to create more joy and ease? Give me a thumbs up or a smile in the chat. Yay, Sarah. Awesome, Carissa. Yay, thank you, Anissa. All right, great. Lena, awesome. So ready. I love that. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's dive in and talk about stress. What is stress? So I think it's always helpful, especially when we talk about a lot of things that are just kind of buzzing around, right? Buzzwords. Us consultants love buzzwords and love using things that are heard very often, but sometimes they may just become words. So I love for us to just get started with a basic definition of what we mean by stress. So stress can be defined as any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. So even right now, as I'm presenting to you all today, even though I've done this presentation so many times, I've presented to hundreds of clients, done presentations, I still have butterflies in my stomach, right? There's still a little bit of nervousness, right? It's normal. So that's kind of a reaction to maybe not necessarily stress, but it's a response, something that I'm feeling in my body, right? And it's important to kind of acknowledge that. And with stress, we can be stressed physically, we can be stressed emotionally, we can be stressed psychologically as well. And different things, important to note that different things activate our stress and then our stress response, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a second. And I'd just like to share a little bit about just my own personal experience with stress and burnout. So just to give a little bit of context, several years ago, I was physically and emotionally burnt out. I didn't realize it at the time. I now know, looking back, that that's what was happening. But I had experienced so many different things in my life. I had experienced a personal loss. I had experienced the joyful birth of my first child. I had multiple promotions that I was receiving at work, all of it happening in a very short amount of time, in a compressed amount of time. And it was all coming at me. And all I knew how to do was to keep doing, keep performing, keep hustling until something had to give, because I kept going, because that's just what I do. I'm the one that keeps things together. I'm the strong one. And actually, I love that about myself. I truly do. But when it serves me, and at that time in my life, it wasn't serving me, because I was tired, I was exhausted, and I landed myself in the hospital for complex migraines. I had never had this level of migraines, but they ended up getting the diagnosis that they were complex migraines, which, not to go into too much detail about it, but it causes numbness in one side of your body and then just severe headaches, right? It's like migraines times 100. And didn't know why they were happening. But what I did know is that I couldn't go on like this. It was not a way that I could keep living, because what was happening is I was missing out on all the joy that was in my life. I was missing out on all the blessings because I was so stressed. I was so exhausted, but I was numb. So I couldn't feel, the joy that was in my life. I couldn't even acknowledge it. So I had to take steps to figure out, how do I make a change? And what that looked like for me at the time was to slow down and create more space in my day, to lessen my workload if that was possible. So I tried to take steps to do that. And here's the thing though, and what I've learned is, wherever you go, there you are. So even though I lessened my workload, and even though I created more space, there was still something that was missing. There was a missing piece of the puzzle, and it was really the inner work, and the things that were happening inside of me, the thoughts that I was having. So I chose to get curious about what was happening, because I changed my environment, I reduced my workload, and yet I still was feeling stressed. And there was also some frustration there, and I was just frustrated, and I didn't know what was going on. And so I got curious, and what I got down to was that there were a lot of thoughts that were running through my mind around things of, I'm not deserving of all of this. I'm not good enough. I have to keep working. What do you mean I have to lessen my workload? Like, it just wasn't, I felt like it wasn't enough. And these thoughts can really be detrimental to our health. And that's what I learned, that was what was causing a lot of some of my stress and a lot of the emotions that were happening. And those stuck emotions, and this is what we'll talk about when we get to the stress response cycle, is that they can be detrimental to our health because they'll manifest in different ways, right? In my case, it manifested in these complex migraines, and it manifested in illness and sickness and just being unable to show up in the way that I wanted to. So that's just a little bit about my firsthand experience with stress. So let's get a little bit curious about where stress comes from for you. So I'd love if you just put in the chat, where does your stress come from? Just type it in the chat. And as folks are doing that, from work, Sarah, yeah, primarily work. Work seems to be the culprit. Work and life balance, managing expectations across personal and professional. Yeah, stress can come from all kinds of places, right? And then I want you to take it one step further. When you think about that stress and when you're experiencing that stress, what does it feel like in your body? Even if you could describe it, what does it look like? What does it even color? If there's like a color to it, what is it? If you could describe it, what would you say about that stress? Tightness in my chest. Red haze. Tense shoulders and neck. Pit in my stomach. Carissa, feeling like I constantly have to be accomplishing more, right? I can relate to that. Nothing's ever enough, the sense of more. And what I heard in a lot of that too is just a sense of tension, right? There's a lot of it's tense, it's tension. And that's what stress creates. Our body then contracts, right? It tightens up when we're experiencing stress. And the thing is with acknowledging the stress, first acknowledging that it's even happening is the first step in realizing, okay, what can I do about it, right? And what does stress relief look like? What does burnout prevention look like? How do I prevent burning out? And both those things are a practice, right? It's a continual practice. And we're going to talk about those strategies in a little bit, but it's a practice. It's not a one and done. So a lot of what you all just described were stressors, right? There's stressors that activate our stress response, right? And so when we think about a stressor, as you all mentioned, right, work and life balance, different things that might create that strain or that tension. And that's what a stressor does. It creates that state of strain and that tension, and which causes us to feel like we're in danger. Right? Even though we may not be in danger, we're probably not in the middle of the woods with a bear coming at us, or in the middle of somewhere where there's a lion that's coming at us, or like true danger. But our body, that's how our body is reacting. Our body is responding because it feels that there is danger. So it's important to recognize that stress is a response to danger or some sort of threat. If there's no danger, then there's no stress. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like to create safety when we feel a sense of danger, even if it's real or not real. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But if we can just identify that, again, number one step of identifying where our stress is being activated. So and let's talk about just briefly about real versus self-created stress or self-created dangers, right? For instance, for myself, for example, the last couple of days, I've been waking up a little bit later than I should. And this creates all kinds of stress in my body, because what happens? I go into high gear. I'm going to be late. I got to get the kids out the door. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do this. All these things, all these thoughts that create stress and that make me feel like I am in danger when I'm really not in danger. And so noticing that for myself, recognizing that, and then choosing a different thought. And oftentimes for me, what seems to work is I look myself in the mirror as I'm getting ready. I'm like, there is enough time for everything. It's all going to get done. And I know this might sound silly, because honestly, when people used to tell me this, I was like, that can't work. But I'm here to tell you that 9 times out of 10, I get out the door with plenty of time. and I don't feel as stressed or as frazzled as when my brain is screaming at me, you're going to be late, you're going to be late, you're going to be late, right? That pressure that my thoughts are creating. So stressors can be internal, right? As the example I just gave, those were my thoughts that were creating stress in my body. That then manifested in the actions that I take, which in most cases is maybe yelling at my kids to get themselves out the door, or yelling at myself that how could I have overslept, and that does me no good, right? So some stressors can be internal, and some stressors can be external. So it's important to recognize the differences between the two. So if I was to ask you now, what are your biggest stressors in your life right now? Go ahead and put them in the chat. Finances, career path. Yeah, and irregular sleep, work expectations. Yeah, when I read career path too, when Alex said that, something that came to mind was around potentially uncertainty, right? Uncertainty can also create stress when we're not sure of what's coming next, or what you should do next, or what we should do next, right? That can create stress in our bodies as well. So now let's just jump and talk about the stress response cycle. Talk a little bit about what that is, and talk a little bit about how we even recognize when it's activated, right? So the stress response cycle, it's our body's natural response to stress. It's our natural way of responding to what's happening in our lives and what we're experiencing. So very simply, of when we perceive danger, right, or when we perceive a threat, we activate our stress response. And this may happen really quickly, and we may quickly transition into fight or flight reaction. Either we freeze and do nothing, or we take immediate action and jump to something that we're used to doing. In the case of my earlier example, when I was talking about waking up late, I have this fear that I'm going to be scolded for being late, or I'm going to fail, or I'm going to fail in some way, or my children are going to fail because they're going to be late to school, right? My mind starts making up all these kinds of stories because of my conditioning of when I was younger, right? When I was younger, we were never late. If you were late, that was just not a good thing, right? So it was part of my conditioning. But this could be farther from the truth, right? So I have to check myself on my thoughts. But when I have that thought, I believe it. And so it is a threat, and it is a perceived danger. So my stress response is activated, right? And in most cases, I go into overdrive. And so I go into overcompensating and going above and beyond, which I get up to the point of exhaustion. So it's activated in that way. So it's acknowledging that that's happening, and in acknowledging that in most cases we react how we've always reacted. Our reactions almost become habitual. But what's important to note is that we can pause in that potential moment when we acknowledge what's happening, and maybe take a breath, or look ourselves in the mirror. In my case, that seems to work for me, in order to regulate our nervous system, right? So, and help us to bring us to a state of calm, in whatever that could look like, right? And then we're able to see a different option, or a different choice. I think someone earlier mentioned that stress sometimes feels like a red haze. And when I hear that, it feels to me, it's like then you can't see clearly, right? It's blurry. We can't see any opportunities or possibilities or different choices. So the key with the stress response is knowing that it's going to get activated. It's a normal part of being human, right? But we get to choose how we respond to that stress. And the data suggests, there's been a lot of studies that have been done. The data suggests that regulating our nervous system and bringing it to a point of calm and maybe even just neutral, right, versus being in fight or flight, is a way of helping us to complete the stress response cycle in a healthy way. Because what happens is when we don't complete that stress response cycle, the emotions and the things that we are feeling, be it frustration or anger or anxiety, you can name any emotion. What happens when we don't complete that stress response cycle is that it gets stuck in our body, right? Our body holds all this information. Our emotions are also information. It gets stuck in our bodies, and it manifests in different ways. It could be illness, it could be burnout. So it could be different things. So it's important for us to acknowledge what we're feeling, what we're experiencing in a particular moment, and finding a way that supports us to do that, and then addressing what needs to be done in order for us to move through the stress response cycle in a healthy way. So right now, when I ask you, what currently triggers your stress response? Just put it in the chat. What currently triggers your stress response? If I'm not expecting something, I feel pressure to respond immediately. Work emails and the sound of a Teams chime. Yes, there's that. Definitely, that's a trigger. It's a visible and auditory trigger. And then my next question for you all is unread emails. Yes. Feeling rushed to be on time. Jessica, I relate to that. Unread emails as well. It can be hard to be staring at an inbox with all the emails that still need to be get through. That can definitely create some stress. And right now, when you think about those stressors that activate that stress response and create those emotions in your body, what processes do you currently use, or strategies do you currently use to respond to it? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Yoga, going for a walk, meditation. Try to find a quiet room and just take some deep breath. I use a 2-minute breathing exercise. That's wonderful. Yeah, those are some great tools and strategies. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. When completing the stress response cycle, we're basically creating an opportunity for us to acknowledge what's happening, give ourselves some space between the actual stressor and our response, right? Sarah says, if I'm really overwhelmed, I will run outside. Yeah, you're creating distance from your stressor, right? You're creating some distance from your stressor so that you can then come back and respond in a way that is coming from a place of hopefully reflection and a calm nervous system, right? So that's important, because many of us were not taught how to process some of these things that come up, our emotions, be it frustration, angst, anxiety, the different things that may activate our stress. And so it's important to identify them, acknowledge, okay, I've been activated at the moment, and this is what's happening. And so in order to prevent extreme stress and burnout, we need to allow our bodies to process what's happening. So doing a run, meditating, some breathing exercises helps to create that space and helps us to acknowledge what's happening. So let's talk just a little bit about when that doesn't happen, when we don't create that space for ourselves, that's where burnout might occur. And so these are some of the signs of burnout. When we are feeling just a level of exhaustion, right? There's a level of emotional exhaustion. And this occurs when we don't name or address what's happening, when we don't name or address that we're feeling frustrated or we're feeling triggered in some way, or that we're anxious or that we're nervous. So emotional exhaustion happens when those emotions occur, but we don't name them or address them. And we just let them kind of sit, right? We let them fester. Some of us suppress them and just push them down. And then over time, that creates exhaustion, right? We just get too tired. And so it's not sustainable. Suppressing our emotions is not sustainable. Another sign is a decreased sense of accomplishment, right? So we don't feel like we've actually already talked a lot about it earlier in this presentation. Like we don't feel like we're enough. We don't feel like we're doing enough. There's more that needs to be done. So there's a decreased level of sense of accomplishment. We feel like we're not accomplishing anything when most likely we are. But when we're burnt out, we're not able to see or feel it, right? Depersonalization. So this is when there's a depletion of empathy, of caring and compassion, not only for others, but for ourselves. We're not able to give ourselves the love and the care that we need. And then this is what causes additional exhaustion, and it causes additional dissatisfaction, right? So we disassociate not only from others, but we disassociate from ourselves and what we need. So interestingly enough, burnout is not necessarily a phenomenon. It's real and it's happening. A lot of people are experiencing it. But actually, a new study that looked at over 10,000 knowledge workers across 7 different countries have found that approximately 70% of people experienced burnout in the last year. 70%. When I read that number, I thought that is a huge number. So even though burnout is real, there is another way. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, and Kate, we can go to the next slide. Yeah. But before we do that, I want to invite you to take a moment and just kind of get comfortable wherever you're sitting. Because I don't know about you, like all this talk of stress and burnout, it's causing just a little bit of angst in my own body. I can just even feel it. So just take a moment, and I want to invite you to close your eyes for a moment, if it feels comfortable. And then just notice your breath, your inhale and exhale, and just breathe at your own pace, whatever feels comfortable to you. And then I'd love to invite you to imagine. Imagine what ease and calm would feel like. Imagine what it would feel like to be relaxed. What do you see, hear, and feel when you imagine? Just simply imagine. And then take in a couple more breaths. And then I will count us out from 3 to 1. 3, 2, 1. Please open your eyes when you're ready. What did you imagine? Can you write it in the chat? The piece of the beach at sunrise. Being near the ocean and hearing the sound of gentle waves. Sunday morning, nothing on my schedule. Also on the beach, feeling the sand and watching the waves. Sunny beach with a cool breeze. I love it. Thank you all for sharing and for going on that little trip of imagining. And this is why we're talking about stress and burnout today, because that relaxed state that you just imagined, we'd like it to be your reality more frequently than stress and burnout. So maybe it's not physically on a beach, but how do you create what you just imagined and what you just felt in your day-to-day? And why it's so important to talk about this challenge, right? This challenge of stress and burnout that's plaguing so many. First off, because it's possible to break the cycle of burnout, and it's possible to complete our stress response cycle in a healthy way. We don't have to continue living in a perpetual state of burnout, stress, frustration, fatigue, exhaustion. Second, because you are worthy and deserving of feeling good in your body, which involves taking care of it and taking care of yourself on multiple levels. And first off, even being here today, right? Registering, and not only registering for this, but showing up for it, right? This is an investment in your well-being, in the care of yourself. So acknowledging that you're worthy of that, you're worthy of that care and that love and that investment, which you're showing to yourself. And finally, too, living in a world where there is more calm, more ease, more joy, just makes for healthy humans roaming the earth. It's just as simple as that. So I'm here for that. Who else would agree? Who else is here for that? You can give me a thumbs up in the chat. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I see some applause and thumbs up. Thanks, Carissa. Thanks, Lena. Thanks, Jessica. All right, on this next slide, I want to share with you just one of my favorite quotes. This quote is by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So in order for us to be able to pause and make a conscious choice, which when I read this quote is what it's inviting us to do, we need to be aware of what's happening and create that pause, right? Create that space. We need to lean into our awareness and be intentional about how we respond to stressors that are coming our way, because they're going to come our way. The good news, though, is that we're capable of choosing how we respond. We have the tools and we are capable and resilient in using those tools. And it's that awareness that that we've talked about today, about being aware of what stress is, what our stressors are, how we respond to them, and creating that space in order to make a choice that best serves us, that best serves us mind, body, and soul, right? So so how do we do that? How do we move our bodies from a stress state into a resting state? The good news is that even just the awareness that we are being activated and that our bodies are responding to something that has triggered our stress is an unbelievable step in order to be able to create that space for us to really rest. But the key here is moving from a stress state into a resting state. And I'd love, folks, if you have a piece of paper and pen to write this down, what helps us to do that is to create safety for ourselves, right? So as we talked about earlier, right, stress is really a response to a danger or threat. So how do we create that resting state? Is to create safety in our body and create safety for ourselves. So what feels safe to you? Consider some of these questions. What feels safe to you? Go ahead and put that in the chat as well. Actually, I'd love to hear what feels safe to you. A hug or cozy blanket and tea. So yeah, so when we create safety in our bodies, that puts us back into the driver's seat versus having stress be in the driver's seat. So a few more chats are coming in. So being around people who love me, yes, connection, being with my dad. Yeah, so it's important to recognize what feels safe and how to create safety for yourself, right? Because it's important to get curious about who's in the driver's seat, you or your stress. So when we think about creating safety in our body, we're putting ourselves back into the driver's seat. When our stress response is activated, our body is asking us to pay attention and to take some sort of action. So our job is to listen and to take the lead. But if we are in fight or flight, or we feel like we're in danger, it's really challenging for us to take the lead and do that. So creating safety in our body, whatever that could look like for us. So, what was mentioned today is like a warm blanket or a tea, enjoying a cup of tea, or talking to someone that we care deeply about and love, surrounding ourselves with someone that cares for us, helps to create that safety, and then helps us to create that space to make a conscious choice, right? And puts us back into the driver's seat versus our stress. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about what it looks like to be in the driver's seat, right? So, and we've talked a lot about this already, but this is just something I wanted to show again from my consulting days. There's always some sort of process graph, but just to summarize here, right? Noticing what we're feeling in our body, acknowledging it, allowing ourselves to feel whatever is coming up, right? Be it frustration or anxiety, or even the good to feel feelings, right? Like joy. We give kind of the bad to bad, the feelings that don't feel so good, such a bad rap, but they're telling us something, right? They're telling us something. So our job is to get curious. What do we need in that moment? What are these emotions trying to tell us? And then finally, giving ourselves permission to give ourselves whatever we need in that particular moment. So on the next slide is some of the things that actually folks have already mentioned and talked about, but these are some evidence-based strategies that help us to complete the stress cycle and help our body to come to a place of safety, right? So here are some things that your body may need when your stress response is activated. It could be physical activity. I think Sarah mentioned earlier, if she's extremely stressed, getting up and running and taking a run outside, right? Many people mentioned breathing, taking a moment for either a 2-minute breathing break or finding a quiet space where we just kind of hone in on our breath. That's another way to complete the stress cycle. Positive social interaction, right? Being surrounded and being connected with people that care and love us. That is a big piece of creating safety in our body. We're human, and so we are wired for connection. So creating that opportunity to connect with others helps us to create that level of safety and give ourselves what we need in the form of connection with others. Laughter, enjoying a good laugh, and really like the belly laughing kind, not just the fake type of laughing, like true laughing. Affection. So someone earlier mentioned like a warm hug supports them. So finding opportunity to do that, and that creates safety. And sometimes we just need to cry, like a big old cry. Right, we're letting it all out. That is a form of releasing some of the emotions that are coming up in our body. I know for me, crying doesn't necessarily come easily, and as part of my conditioning, it was, you don't cry. Crying shows weakness. And that's just part of my upbringing, right? And that's just kind of how I grew up, right? I never, for example, saw my mother cry. And, as I got older and I started doing this inner work and realizing, well, you know what? No, it's okay to cry. It's a form of release. And it's okay to let other people see you cry too. So this is another way. And then creative self-expression, right? Allowing yourself to be creative, whatever that looks like for you. It's going to be different for everybody, but it could be like writing, it could be sketching, it could be painting, whatever that looks like. So these are just a few of the different activities that can support us when we feel activated. And then how do we know we've completed the stress cycle? So the one thing that I could tell you is we feel it in our body, right? Our body will tell us. It's just like we walked through today, where you were able to identify what your stress looks like and feels like in your body. It's the same thing of when you know and feel safe and when you feel relaxed. Your body will tell you. So I invite you to learn to listen to it, learn to listen to your body, give it the attention it needs. In my case, I was ignoring the signs and the symptoms of burnout. And instead of releasing the stress, I kept pushing through, I kept suppressing until I couldn't suppress any longer. And I wouldn't wish that for anybody. And that's why I feel so strongly about learning more about how our body is talking to us and learning how to be gentle with ourselves and each other. So these are just some of the key kind of thoughts that I'd love to leave you with. I think if one thing that you remember from this presentation today, remember that you are capable of safety in your own body and that you are capable of making the next best choice in any given moment. So, there's just so many little steps that you can take. And the one other thing I'd like to leave you with as well. So I guess two things, right? One is that you are capable of creating safety in your body. And the second one is that it's a daily practice, right? Responding to stress, preventing burnout, recovering from burnout is a daily practice. They're practices, they're not one and done. So thanks for having me here today. And I wish you all well, and I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah. And I hope that we can continue some of these conversations in different venues as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tanya. So I hope that you all moving forward, kind of instead of being reactive, which I know that was always like my go-to, I would just feel like I need to respond immediately or something like that. And then I would kind of regret what I had said later. Now I really try to, take pause and respond more intentionally. So I hope that you have some tools now to be able to do that as well. And I think for me, just acknowledging how you're feeling and completing the stress cycle, for me, this was like the biggest change as far as managing my stress, because I used to just push things out of my mind. I would disassociate, and just be like, oh, I don't feel stressed, even though I was just pushing that down. Or also for me, my body kind of goes into a freeze mode, which what I really need to do is move that stress out of my body instead of just sitting there. And for the longest time, I would just freeze and not move that. And then I'd be covered with eczema, or maybe it manifests in migraines, or, it'll come up in lots of different ways, different sicknesses or whatever. But completing that stress cycle will really help that move through your body. And, like Tanya said, you can change things externally, but it really comes down to doing that inner work and getting in touch with your values, your limiting beliefs, your dreams. Like, what are the things in my life that are, out of alignment? So if you'd like to ask yourself, if you're ready to really invest in making a shift in showing up differently. I know that's not easy, but you don't have to do that alone or in the dark. And so that is why I created the retreat for Impactury. I shared with you my own struggle with dealing with stress and burnout and just kind of getting to the place that I am today. That was a very isolating and frustrating process. And so with the retreat, I've really made this into a healing and expansive process for you. So, starting with a safe space to rest and relax, and you'll be in a new environment away from like the distractions and busyness of your day-to-day grind. We'll also be in a small group of other inspiring women who will support you and really show you compassion. And they also have gone through the same struggles as you and are ready to make that change. So you can feel comfortable, being vulnerable. But we're also going to challenge you. You'll have, working through these things is a messy process, but you'll have the support of the group as well as professional coaches who will help to bring light and make peace with, whatever challenges or blocks are holding you back, and really find clarity as you navigate to what's next, whether that's just living a life with more peace, or maybe you're in a transition point in your life. And then after the retreat, you'll also have access to executive coaching, because I want to make sure that whatever the changes are that you do learn and you do start practicing, that you're able to integrate those back into your day-to-day life. And then we'll also have an opportunity to do a short marketing project with a local social enterprise. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart, using our skills to give back. And at the very end, we're going to do a helicopter tour of Mount Everest Base Camp, which is just like amazing. You just have to be there in the presence of these giants to really appreciate it. But anyway, this is truly the experience of a lifetime. And, if this is something that is calling to you, I would love to hear from you. So you can feel free to reach out on impactury.com. You can schedule a coffee chat, or you can send me an email. But also, because you're in the workshop, we have a special opportunity for you. If you do schedule your coffee chat today to meet at some point this week, then we can discuss the retreat and if that's a good option for you. But you'll also, if you do end up reserving, you'll get a complimentary villa upgrade and an extra massage. So that should help you definitely relax and get more in touch with yourself. So thanks again for joining the event. I hope that you got some value out of it. And we also have more events coming up next week. We are talking all about your your identity, authenticity, and really how that can get lost with work and all of these other external expectations and kind of just external noise. So we'd love to see you for that. So you can RSVP at impactury.com/event. So thank you, everybody, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Sarah. Thanks, Tanya. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.